back to the Real Barbecue Nerds podcast, where smoke meets structure, flavor meets fire, and meat always tells a story. I'm Dave, the Real Meat Stick, and tonight we're going bone deep in barbecue ribs deep dive, beef versus pork cuts and techniques. If you've ever stood at the butcher counter or looked at a raw rack of ribs and wondered, what am I really working with here? This episode is for you. We're breaking down the cuts anatomically and technically so you can cook smarter, slice cleaner, and serve better. And with me, as always, is my good friend and visionary, the man who turned steel into smoke-breathing beasts, Mr. Frank Cox.
Hey, what's up? I am trying to really quickly embed the player on Facebook, which it isn't going to work. Just trying it out, though, on our Facebook group, and it completely didn't work. Anyway, that's what I was doing. That's why my light went away, because my big monitor up here is no longer shining on me. But now it is. We're back.
That's right.
Yeah. Ribs, not a better topic to talk about, I can't think of anyway.
No, this is one of my favorite topics. So let's dive right into it. Let's start with beef ribs. And first, we need to talk about location. The plate ribs, those are the ribs that are known 6 through 8. They're cut from the short plate primal, just below the ribeye and anterior to the flank. What you're looking at is the lower thoracic cage. This is where fat and muscle converge. Heavy marbling, thick intercostals, and a collagen-rich sheath running above the bone. This is brisket's bony cousin. Now, when we compare that to the chuck rib, that's ribs 2 through 6. They sit higher and they're more anterior to the chuck primal, right under the shoulder clod and adjacent to the neck musculature. These ribs are shorter, they're leaner and meatier, but they're dense with connective tissue and extremely flavorful if you know how to treat them.
Yeah, so you spent all day writing that.
Well, here's the thing, beef ribs, like to me, beef ribs, that was my first major bite in barbecue. Yeah. And at that point, it was always explained to me, because I like brisket, that this is brisket on a stick. And those dino ribs, those are the plate ribs. Those are the ones that usually come. You get about 3 ribs, and they're monstrous. And when people think of like big barbecue, that's what comes to mind. However, these days, go to Walmart, you go to some other places, people start talking about getting beef ribs. That's really the chuck rib. Sometimes they're trimmed down a bit. They look almost like a baby back rib. And sometimes chuck ribs also come. Like if you go to, I'm going to use an example. You go to like the Restaurant Depot or something, and they come as like a pack of 4. They're 4 big ribs. In many ways, people think that what they're getting is a dino rib. However, it's not. They're still large ribs. They're just not that big Texas dino rib brisket on a stick.
Yeah, see, that's, I think, where a lot of the confusion is with beef ribs, because you'll hear some people talk about how they've had unpleasant experiences cooking them, especially, but eating them. And it's such a beef rib is so big. Like you're talking like it's different bones in the cage, and then it's different ways of them being sawed. They're going to hit those on the bandsaw, right? And when they rip those things long ways across those bones, it depends on where they grab that. Well, I guess if they're an experienced butcher, they're going to hit it right every time. Like if you watch the bearded butchers. But okay, so let's run back through that anatomy part real quick, because it was pretty wordy. Very well put together, but my feeble mind can't grab it. So the first, you said 2 to like rib 2 through 3?
2 through 5 is your chuck rib.
5.
That's closer to the shoulder. So that's the chuck of the steer. Whereas the plate rib is 6 through 8. So it's coming down closer to the flank. So think of the flank and the skirt steak. That's the diaphragm of the cow. So it's much closer to where the lungs would be on the cow versus the shoulder.
How can we tell when we're in the grocery store?
That's a great question. That is an excellent question. So here's probably the best way. You're looking at the thickness of that rib.
Okay.
When we're dealing with the plate rib, it's usually a lot meatier. It's extremely long, and if you're getting the whole plate, it's a full 3 bone across. That's not to say that your local grocery store doesn't take 1 bone off, and now you're looking at 3 bones under a cellophane wrapper, and you're going, "Oh yeah, that I must be getting the right one because, I heard that Dave the Real Meat Stick told me I should be looking for 3 bones, and that certainly is 3 bones."
So what they usually do in the grocery store, like they order larger cuts, and then if they have meat cutters on staff, we call them meat cutters, not butchers up here, because the meat cutters are typically unskilled. They've been taught by the guy that was in the department the longest, and so they'll start to butcher in like, like mess it up butcher. They'll start to butcher up that cut, and they'll make things that like don't make sense out of a brisket that'll wind up being 3 pounds. And that's typically my experience for what happens to things like beef ribs that I want to buy in the case around here. So I'm also wondering if they get the name messed up for the cut. Like everything becomes a slang plate rib, short rib.
Right.
Right. Do you think that's possible?
I definitely think it is. And when you think of short rib, that's usually your chuck primal. When you think of like your beef flanken ribs or the Korean ribs, I don't know if you ever seen those, they slice them very thin. That's the same thing. They're taking that chuck primal and then they're running it on the bandsaw and just making it into thin cuts, perpendicular to the bones.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. So it's really difficult for guys like me. I'm giving everybody a welcome. Everybody. Sorry, that's why I broke concentration there. Anyway, so it's really difficult for a guy like me. Like, are the bones themselves, the rib cage bones, are they shaped like oval at one end and more round on the other? Or is there some way you can tell by looking at the bone itself, like a cross section of the bone, if you can see it in the package?
I think it's probably pretty difficult visually. It goes back to that whole Tommy Boy thing, about if you want to get a good look at a T-bone. You take the butcher's word for it. In your case, the meat cutter's word. There's so many different ways that it could be a pseudo cut, and you believe you're getting one thing, but you're getting something else. There's tomfoolery. There's trickery in the industry. And why would they do that? Because you can get more on a plate rib. As far as price per pound, you're going to charge more on that plate rib than you are on the chuck rib.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I've seen beef ribs in the case before where one end of the rib had a lot more bones showing in the middle of the meat side. Like it wasn't like this nice, thick, even, perfectly manicured beef rib that was thick. It was like a little more spotty. Which end did that come from? Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? Have you ever seen that?
I'm thinking if it's in the middle in the arch, that's a shiner. That's somebody with bad knife skills.
That's what I think. I've
You
always
are correct.
thought that because that's what happens on pork ribs is you get those shiners in there, and that's a guy that just can't tell where the line is, or he's in too big a hurry and he just cuts right in.
That's right. So what they're doing when they're trimming them up. First thing is they're taking that fat cap down a bit. Then they're trying to do you a favor by get the silver skin off. And when they're doing that, they're getting too close to the bone, and then you're getting those shiners in there.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. So the best beef rib. Well, I don't want to get ahead of you. You prepared very well. What's next?
I'm going to say the best beef rib that I ever had, and was Black's Barbecue when I was in Austin, Texas. That initial bite, and it was so rich. Very simple: salt, pepper, garlic. The way that they do theirs is very similar to our smoke slinger. It's a pit barbecue. It's traditional Texas pit instead of being an offset. Just that one bone, and I believe it was like, listen to this price, about $25 a pound. So you're talking $50 for one rib. Right? And you're paying for the bone. So all that meat that's on there, most of the weight is really coming from that bone. The flavor was so intense that after that, it's hard to then enjoy other types of meats. You can go
Oh
for
yeah.
the turkey. The turkey's great. It's a lot leaner. It's a different flavor. But to go from that over to brisket or over to pork, it was a very difficult transition.
Mm-hmm. So the best beef rib I've ever had, personally, was at Slaps. My buddy Joe Pierce at Slaps Barbecue in Kansas City, and the rib was sourced from KC Cattle Company. It was a Wagyu beef rib. I have a video of Lisa taking a bite of it because I thought that was awesome. The thing's as big as her head. You know, it's one of those real good ones, and it was glorious. That rib was very, very good. I've never had a beef rib that I've cooked like that. It was very good. It was very rich, like you're saying. It's just the everything was amazing. Yeah. One day I'll get good at it, and maybe I can do that.
You know, with Wagyu, the fat concentration is so high. The marbleization, the striation of the fat, the intramuscular fat is so high that I have to imagine just how juicy that had to be that you want to take a nap afterwards. If nothing else than that, you know, when I was a portly individual, after eating meat like that, not only would I get the meat sweats, but I would go into a meat coma.
Mm-hmm.
It just
Yeah.
that was so good.
By the way, brought TD up here. What's up, TD? Appreciate you joining us tonight. Did you see his beef rib that he posted today?
Yeah, I was hoping he'd be here to chat with us
Enlighten us.
about his cook. It looked
Yeah.
intense.
Yeah, it was awesome. If you guys want to see where TD done that, go to the Smoke Slinger Pit Owners group on Facebook. You'll be able to tune in there and see the action unfold. Got to welcome my bro, David Kreiser. Man, it's good to see you in there, David. Appreciate you, brother. Glad you're hanging out with us. Another shout out. He's here from TD. He says, I could only take one bite, took a nap after. That's the rib you eat on for a couple of days, probably.
Yeah.
Daddy Dutch in the house. Appreciate you, brother.
You know, recently
Yeah.
I did an experiment because I wanted to see what it would be like on a traditional offset. So I rolled out my Liberty 94 and I decided to cook this just like a brisket, since, you know, like I was saying, the plate ribs are brisket on a stick.
Mm-hmm.
I cooked it all the way through at 250 degrees using that post oak that I had, unwrapped until that bark set and that fat melted down to the muscle. The bones were thick, and I'm telling you, it just needed extra time. I believe that I was at 6 hours on the cook. Then I wrapped, and it took an additional 2 hours to get them to that real great tenderness.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that I overcooked them if we were able to pull the bone out from in the ribs and everything stayed together?
No. On a beef rib, I would say you nailed it.
Okay.
As long as your tenderness on the meat was right. Like, the bone should pull loose and pull out, because then we're going to take, I don't know, man. I guess it's kind of up to the person that is like eating it, but I prefer to have the meat stay intact and be really good yellow, good fat render in there, but the meat stay together. And then you take that bone and just give it one small wiggle side to side, like a twist, and then it should just pull right out. That's what I think is the perfect beef rib myself. Did you score the membrane?
I was about to get into that because that, you know, I'm not trying to get to the pork ribs, but when we do pork ribs, it gets a little different. Yes, I did. I made hatch marks in the back on the underside of my ribs. I've done that beforehand. I don't want the membrane off. I do that with my pork ribs from time to time. But here I just scored them in the hopes that some of that salt and some of the garlic that I use as well would penetrate the underside of the meat. It really doesn't. Some people say it's even a waste to put all that extra coating on the bottom. It's good for a look, especially if you put a binder on. But outside of that, I think the scoring, what it really did was help for the bone to pull itself out later on.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do score the membrane on mine, heavily score, because I do want to get rid of that bone. The one thing though that about the seasoning side of it is I do think there's some value in salting that membrane with some kosher salt. I don't know. It just seems like anytime you salt a membrane, especially if you've got direct heat, if we were cooking on the full size or the mini smoke slinger with direct heat, that's a great opportunity to actually tater chip up that membrane a little bit. And that salt really helps with that. Not sure because I've never sat and ate the membrane, but I bet it would be beneficial, you know. Yeah. It seems like though that the rib that primary, like when everybody thinks beef rib though, where did you say again anatomically where that comes out of the cut on the rib cage?
Okay, so when we're talking the plate rib, that's the one that's going to be lower down. That's getting down towards the diaphragm. Whereas when we're talking the chuck rib, that's coming up towards the shoulder clod. That's the chuck.
Yeah, and then the chuck end of that is going to be the ones that don't have as much intermuscular fat, or the other way.
Yeah, because we're getting closer
navel
to the clavicle. Right.
Yeah. So when we get down towards that diaphragm, towards the bottom piece of the rib cage, that's where all the glory is, and that's why that would be the pick out of that. And that's 6, 7, and 8. You said the bones, or is it 5, 6, 7, 8?
No, the plate is 6, 7, and 8. The chuck is 2, 3, 4, and 5.
2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. Somehow I'm gonna get that. I've never been able to remember that.
Here's the way to think of it. So you have 3 ribs, 6, 7, and 8. So those are your 3, and that's how you know that you're looking at your plate. Whereas with your chuck, you have 4 ribs, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those are the 4 numbers together. Get rid of 1 because one is too tiny.
Right. So where does the term short rib come from?
I think that comes because it's the shorter. You're taking
They're just cutting them short.
Short rib. You're cutting them shorter.
I feel ripped off. I feel ripped off because I think the local Amish butcher shop down here, I've never really had a great experience there. It's always been a mess. Top of that, it's an hour and a half from here to get there, you know. But they do some of that butchery, like I said a while ago. It's not really the best cutting. It's always got issues, whatever. And they usually cut them about 4 inches long, like just enough. Like if I don't even know who would cook that, like grandma in the oven, like just trying to use it up, not be wasteful, I guess. Like I've never, maybe you do some kind of fancy French dish with that. I don't know. They're not very good.
Well, I've done that. I've braised them. I've cooked them in a pan with red wine and butter and other things. It's just like, it's definitely a longer process.
Yeah.
But when you brought up the mini smoke slinger and full size smoke slinger, because I wanted to also just get a little bit of that chuck primal. That's where I really do like to go hot and fast, is on my full size smoke slinger. I just find that when I'm making those chuck ribs on a full size smoke slinger, that they're more forgiving on a direct heat application. I run them 275 to 300, whereas when I'm doing the plate ribs, I'm at 250. And then I tend to wrap at color to protect the moisture. They've got less intramuscular fat than your plate ribs, but they give you a beautiful short cook if you manage to stall smart.
Yeah, that's great. Everything does get done faster on the direct heat though too, with the same results. You know, I've been sitting here going through data on my side all day today and yesterday, just reviewing some of the content that we've made, thinking about some of the cooks that we've had, like our get together down in Canton that we did, which we got to bring that up, by the way, for May. But thinking about that cook where we did the beef ribs on the Liberty 94, and we also did a similar rack, or the other piece of the rack, on the direct heat pit, and just how those 2 sets of ribs were basically identical. Like I couldn't tell the difference, but the ones on the direct heat pit did get done a lot faster. Is that what your thoughts were on that as well?
Every time. There's something magical about when I'm using my smoke slinger. And I brought this up with TD he had independently came up with the same results as when he was cooking
That was funny.
briskets. Same thing. Magically 8 hours is the time spent.
Yeah.
Whether you're doing a large cut like a pork shoulder, or you're doing a brisket, or I'd say even if I was to take these big plate ribs and put them on there, 8 hours is the magic number, and that's just the way that it is. The other big feature, when I'm using a smoke slinger versus my Liberty 94, is I have it that set it and forget it. If my charcoal baskets are set up properly, it gives me the opportunity to be able to walk away, which is, you know, this just as much as I do. Whether you're in a competition, you're at home, it does come a point where your body crashes. We're getting older.
Yeah, for sure. Or you get something comes up in the middle and you got to run to town, and because you forgot something, or who knows what. It sure is nice to be able to squeak 5 hours out of a charcoal basket without thinking about it, and come back and have plenty of time to deal with anything. As a matter of fact, I got in the garage listening to the radio this weekend when I was cooking on Easter, and I was getting bored. I was by myself, had nothing to do, just drink beer and look at YouTubes and or whatever, listen to music, and wasn't no fire really to manage. It was just sitting there doing its thing. It was nice, but at the same time, I kind of was bored. So, which is a good thing if you've got a lot going on, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jordan Schilling here. Well, we got to give a shout out to Daniel Perez in the house, and TD says he's killing it too, and I agree. And then my bro Jordan Schilling is here. Jordan doesn't live too far away from Zimmerman's down there. He knows who I'm talking about. They're right down the street from his place. So anyway.
So let's go over to a topic that I know is definitely in your wheelhouse. You've probably cooked 1 million racks of ribs at this point, between practicing for competitions, being in competitions, practicing at home, cooking for the family, and everything else. So let's switch to that hog. When you break down a side of pork, ribs span 2 anatomical regions. I'm nerding out here, you can tell.
Get it.
So we've got our baby back ribs. Those come from the thoracic vertebrae. This is your thoracic. So I'm just going to go through anatomical on a human being. Your neck is your cervical. Your chest is your thoracic. And then the pain that everybody has, that low back pain, that's the lumbar spine. So now we're dealing with the chest. That's the thoracic vertebrae. It's right along. So baby back ribs come from thoracic vertebrae, right along the top portion of the rib cage near the loin. So again, baby back, we're talking the back spine. That's where your loin is, and the ribs that are butting that loin are your baby backs. Whereas your spare ribs, which when we trim down become your St. Louis ribs, sit further down the belly, closer to the diaphragm and the sternum being the front of the chest. So the baby backs come from the back. That's why we hear the back. That has nothing to do with a small pig. And I used to think that if the baby backs meant we're getting this from a small pig. No, it's the back, and they're small.
Yeah.
Whereas the longer ribs are coming from the front of the chest.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's why your baby backs are leaner, they're curved, and they cook quickly. You find them nestled between the spine and the upper rib cage. They're essentially the continuation of the pork chop minus the loin. St. Louis ribs, by contrast, are flatter, meatier, and they have more cartilage and intercostal fat. They're great for smoke retention and flavor layering. And that, I have to say, as someone who's been in these competitions and has seen this, is primarily the reason why we see so much of these spare ribs and these trimmed down St. Louis versus the baby backs.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, an important thing to note there is the pork belly sits directly on top of the best part of the spare rib slab. So basically you're getting bacon if you do it right. If you get a good fat, thick slab of spares, So which ones do you like the best? So when you're going to ribs shopping for the store, are you heading straight for the baby backs or the spares, or is it is there some other factor in there that's your decision maker?
Growing up, it was always baby backs. That just happened to be what my dad was cooking all the time. So that's what I knew. When you went to the Chinese restaurants, though, the ribs that you would get were the spare ribs. When I went to other places like chicken and rib joints, it was spare ribs. When I got into the competition, it was spare ribs. And just like you mentioned, I think the best eating rib, and it's something that if you're lucky to find it, or you can do a custom cut, is that spare rib that has the pork belly on it, your pork belly ribs. Sometimes they call it like a bone-in pork belly, and other times they just call it a pork belly
bacon rib.
Oh my goodness! What
the bacon rib?
Ooh, that takes the cake. That's the top. That's the cherry on top.
Yeah, I agree totally. So you're right. The thing I always thought was hilarious though is, and you have to correct me on this because you're the guy with the knife, right? The baby backs, when you trim them up a certain way and you wrap those around, that becomes a crown roast, right?
Correct. Yes. Correct. So now you've got
a crown roast, just a slab of baby backs that's been spun around and tied.
It's the pork chop. That's exactly what.
Okay, so there's a chop in there too.
Correct. That's the center of that. That's your.
I've never ate one. I've never cooked one.
That's an amazing. When you do a crown roast at home, and look, there's something to be able to do on one of your cookers at home. Forget about doing it in the oven, like grandmas do and moms do and the restaurants do. That's fancy schmancy cooking. Let's get down to hardcore backyard.
Right.
Put this on your direct heat cooker.
Yeah. Which, okay, so talking about that real quick, I want to say something to somebody here in the comments. This dude right here, Nakia White, okay, if you ever see that man or Mark Lambert, they're probably usually pretty close together, carrying a pitcher of gravy, everything stops. That's important. Remember that. Love you, Nakia. Appreciate you watching, dude. Anyway, so going back to the spares, that's my favorite. I will take spares over baby backs every single day, and I do like it because of all that intramuscular fat. It is got that little piece of bacon on there, and I'll cook them whole. I won't even worry about St. Louis trim. I'll do the whole spare slab, But practicing, there are so many ways to cook ribs though, man. Like if you really get down into pork ribs, they're very forgiving to cook. They cook a lot faster than beef ribs. You're not having to, for the new guys that are here in the comments and stuff, maybe they're easy to cook, and they're like, you can start off with a simple method like 3, 2, 1. So as far as that goes, my pick of my favorite rib would be spares, baby backs second. And I think baby backs are a lot of people's favorite for 2 reasons. Chili's, the commercials, because they always had that commercial. That's one. It's just Toma, just pounded in their head. And the second thing is because the membrane peels real easy. Take it away, Dave. Talk about that membrane.
Folks, like I told you, Frank is a pitmaster, and St. Louis are pitmaster cut ribs. You're right. You can build flavor through every layer, between the rib, the spritz, the glaze. They're not rushed. Baby backs, on the other hand, they're fast, they're crowd friendly, and they're great for testing different flavor profiles. You can go sweet, heat, you can go vinegar, you can go mustard. They all play nice in a curved rack. But again, if you're going to be that pitmaster, whether you take that full slab of ribs or you take that rack of St. Louis, and this always gets confusing, those 2 words. Am I having a slab of ribs, or am I having a rack of ribs? To me, when I hear a slab is the whole thing. Because it just sounds like I'm throwing a slab down. Whereas when you cut it out, now you have a rack of ribs.
Yeah.
I don't know.
When you start trimming on it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm at this point in my culinary education and tasting profile that I prefer a full slab of ribs or a rack of ribs over the baby backs. the baby backs are nice and tender. They're great. But, even when you go over to like party ribs, party ribs are not your baby backs. Party ribs are your back to your full rack of ribs. You're back to your slab ribs with that little joint that's at the end that sometimes people cut off. That right now I'm forgetting what it's called, but there it is.
Yeah. Well,
rib tips.
Yeah, rib tips. That's right. So when we talk about party ribs around here, what we do is it doesn't really matter if it's a spare or a baby back necessarily. But what it is that we par smoke the slab of ribs, whatever it is. And then so you're going to get them up around 170 something, right? And I did this, actually Mark Lambert did this at his shop, and I was fortunate enough to be there one day where he did this, and then he cut those bones up, and then we deep fried them, and he made a shiitake mushroom gravy, and we put on there on each one of those bones. But those are party ribs is what I always call them. Whenever you're taking that rib and you're doing something else to it, like frying it or something like that, and adding that extra layer of flavor. Matter of fact, we did that with ribs at the NFL draft a couple years ago when it was in Kansas City, because we had so many ribs and we had to run through them so quick. It was a lot easier to do that par smoke, get some smoke on them, drop that temperature down below 40 degrees as fast as we could in the big reefer truck. And then the next day we would cut them up and then pop them in the deep fryer for a few minutes and then take them out of the deep fryer. And we would toss those in a bowl with some pork rub. And when you deep fry that rib, it kind of like popcorns a little bit. It's pretty cool how the fat does that. And when you toss that in that bowl with whatever the sweet rub is, that gets down inside with that hot grease and in that rib. And it's an experience, man. It's great. I don't know if you ever had that or not.
What you're talking about, my mouth is salivating right now.
That was Chef Trevor
frying it. My goodness.
Yeah, Chef Trevor out of Illinois. It was the first time I ever saw that, with toss them in the rub like that, but it was pretty good stuff. Anyway, kind of lost track where I was there. I got excited.
What you did is you started a transition over from our anatomical beef rib and pork rib now into how we prepare these, our seasonings, our rubs, things like that. So I totally agree with that segment. I'm telling you, you should get into the broadcasting industry because you segmented so well. That bridge was right there, smooth.
Andy Groneman is the best I've ever seen. Andy Groneman, Smoke on Wheels, by the way. Shout out to Andy. Go ahead.
I was going to say that for these bad boys, right? Salt, pepper, and garlic, whether you're doing a pork rib or a beef rib, tends to be the go-to. But now we start introducing other flavors. Like when you had just mentioned the party ribs, smoke them, put them in the deep fryer. Then as they come out, they popcorned up, adding on your rubs. We're really building flavor profile.
Yeah.
So just going back to the beef ribs, because I'm looking at someone who said here, John mentions, I wish there was more info on those beef ribs. I love them. Yeah. So this one's for you, John. For the plate ribs and the chuck ribs, what I do is I dry brine overnight with kosher salt. The salt is going to draw out that moisture, then reabsorbs, creating internal seasoning. And then when it comes time for the cook day, I lay a coarse black pepper, garlic granules, maybe a hint of ancho chili or some ground coffee if I'm chasing depth. And that's usually my base. I'm not a big fan of binders. I just find that after I put the salt on and it sat overnight, I pulled the water out and there tends to be still a little bit of a layer that's on there. So at that point, it's just then adding on my black pepper and the garlic. And somebody they came up with the phrase making it's like a Dalmatian rib, or and I believe that was Evan Leroy of Leroy and Lewis. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm using a Dalmatian mix and I'm coating them all over the place, including the underneath, as we were talking about beforehand, the membrane. And that's how I put them on. I keep it simple because I want the meat flavor to come through instead of all those other complex flavors that could be in a rub. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree with that. Yeah. But an important thing to think about too, though, is that with that process, like when we were visiting with Todd Johns here recently, if anybody wanted to see our video where we were doing the tri-tip, it was in the most recent one I posted on Smokeslinger channel. he was talking about when he was putting the bovine bold rub on the tri-tip, he was talking about how that sugar and salt are water soluble, but the other seasonings are not. And so what happens is, hang on one second. All right, there you go. So sorry about that. Anyway, so what happens is the salt and the sugar will actually draw down into the fibers of the meat, and it'll start to pull a lot of that moisture out to the surface. And then the things that are not water soluble can then start to emulsify and rehydrate. And that's when we start to get a little bit of penetration and get that layer of seasoning. So when you're doing your Dalmatian rub like that, or your process, that's kind of a great, that's why that works so well, I think, especially with black pepper, because it doesn't dissolve. It'll just like sit there and soften a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and this goes across the board. I hear people say this all the time. They're very sensitive to black pepper, and they kind of get carried away that they're going to be sneezing. It's going to be too spicy. It's too peppery. Look, the reason why that's put on, in one case, it does add a lot of color, but most of that black pepper and other seasoning over a 6-hour, 8-hour cook, a lot of it gets knocked off. As you start moving things around, it flakes off. That's why we have to put so much on to begin with, knowing that we're going to lose a good portion of it. And it doesn't get that bite. It's not spicy. I just have to reiterate that. You're not, when you see that, it's not like you're taking peppercorns and chewing on them in your mouth.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So
when it comes to beef ribs, I'm not a fan of sugary things on beef ribs, because what I find is that you're going to start to char the edges instead of building bark.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason why I don't go with a brown sugar or a white sugar. The sugary flavors that are imparted, that's usually when we're dealing with our pork ribs. That could be in our glaze. Sometimes it's in the rub, but most of the time that's later on in your cook that you add that on, and it caramelizes on there and gives it that really nice sheen. That's the best.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to cook beef ribs so long that if you put it on too early, you could wind up actually burning that sugar as well. So, but also the tallow that is rendering on those beef ribs, from, if you get the ones we're talking about, that's down towards the diaphragm end, or whatever you called it in your butchery terms there. That tallow, I don't think that's really, I wouldn't want necessarily a sweet rub mixing in at that stage. Like you're saying, like you might glaze on pork ribs later. Burnt bean, when you get ribs or brisket down there, he'll mop it just a little bit right before he puts it on your plate. And that's like we've talked about that in the past. It's like a tomato-based vinegary kind of sauce that's kind of cut with the beef tallow and just some of the juice from the beef, the renders and stuff. And it's just, that is magical, but it's a separate layer that's applied later on in the process, so you didn't burn all that fat. And I think that's really important with beef myself. Yeah. But now when we're talking,
No, I was going to say, well, I mean, that you're about to go there. I'm almost like a mind reader.
I got to slow myself down.
And because I know you're about to go to pork. I know it. I can see it.
It's hard to not.
I know.
So, okay. So with pork ribs, then there's a lot of different ways to roll with this. The style that I like these days is more of a salt and pepper, maybe some other seasonings in there. General backyard pork rib. Favored closely to like El Presidente, Dustin's direct heat ribs. I'm really starting to really like that. But the way I started cooking ribs early on, there was a very thick layer of rub. We had like to put all kinds of other stuff on it. Like I've even put applesauce on ribs, early on, trying to figure out what I was doing. And it's just so much stuff on there. And when I first began, that I just didn't enjoy it as much. But now that I've gotten back into, like, we've been through the competition barbecue side of things, I've had a lot of people's ribs, and the simpler ribs get, I think, the more I like them. How about you? when it comes to all them flavors and all the layers and all the stuff? Where do you tend to be?
I completely agree with you. Even going back to the mop sauce for some of these thicker sauces that are heavy ketchup based, heavy brown sugar or molasses, I like simplicity. If there's going to be a sauce, put it on the side. Let me put my own sauce on. I love dry rubs, and I love the flavor of the meat. And I just think that with the dry rubs, they're able to penetrate the meat a lot better than the sauces on the outside. So when it comes to pork ribs, what I find is that sweet and spicy tends to go better together. The mouthfeel of that, the way that the acidities, when you're dealing with apple cider vinegar and you're spritzing, things like that. You don't do that with beef. You do that with pork. Pork also seems to be a little more forgiving.
It does, yeah. Now, as far as like the way that I apply rub to a slab of ribs, right? I went to the Donnie Bray School way back in the day, Warren County Pork Choppers. That was the first barbecue class I took. And the way that was one of the best pork ribs I've ever eaten, by the way. Whenever that was around 2012, I think, maybe 2013. I can't remember exactly. And he said this layering, this phrase about layering flavors. He said, the last thing you put on is the first thing they're going to taste whenever they're talking competition barbecue. And that's always been stuck in my mind. And then he talked about, so the first thing you put on is the last thing they're going to taste, right? So if you start with your salty layer, you're going to do the salt on that layer, a little bit of sugar. We're going to get that water soluble stuff to go in, like Todd Johns talked about. And we're going to start pulling that moisture out to start hydrating the other ingredients in whatever the rub is. So you put on your salty layer first. He said, hang on a minute, I'm saying it wrong. The order of flavors that they're going to taste is how you start. Sweet, then salt, then smoke, then heat, right? And so you want them to taste in that order. So that's the order you would do something to the ribs. So we're going to have to get some salt on first, but then that's also where we're going to put like a all-purpose style rub at the very beginning. It's going to have just a little bit of heat in it. And then that's going to do its magic with the salt and the sugar and getting everything hydrated. Then what he would do after that sat and sweat for just a little bit on both sides, then he would come back in with something else, right? And usually the combo back in the day was Smoking Guns Hot was the first layer that went on, and then Cimarron Docks. And those two rubs, I believe, are a majority of what started barbecue rubs that we have today. You know, they were after Bad Byron's butt rub, and before like the craze of all of these competition rubs that came out. Pretty much everybody used it. So the Cimarron Docks is where we get more of that standard traditional pork, rub flavor from. And then after you go ahead and cook, and then we start layering the Johnny Trigg way with where we're going to start to braise. We're going to put some rub in or some butter in, all different ways of doing that. And then we were putting on tiger sauce, which is where we got a little bit more of that vinegar in there and stuff like that. And we also put brown sugar in because we're trying to get that sweet layer going, starting that sweet layer. And then after all of that, that's when we glaze our ribs and put them back on in the competition world. Ton of work to get a rib that is really, really, really good, I suppose. Is that the way you did yours at competition?
Competition ribs, like you're saying, is a whole nother world because you need to get as much flavor into one bite. One of the reasons why I got out of competition is I never really enjoyed eating what was left over. There was always because you're always going for that one bite. So I don't want to steal your thunder because you call it the Hollywood cut. Okay, that's
the Hollywood cut.
The Hollywood cut. Okay, so with that cut, you're trying to get one bone with as much meat on it, but now you have all these other ribs left over, And you know that a competition, they don't let you give stuff away. So what do you do with all of this leftover meat? Well, you've been cooking the whole time. Now you got to eat it. I never enjoyed eating all that's left over because of all that butter. And if it wasn't butter, then when we're using parquet and brown sugar and what was the other thing? Agave nectars and syrups and on it. Like there's just so much goop and everything else on this thing. It's like, hello, like I need a Prilosec for the GERD. You know,
dude, it can get intense.
Yeah.
So it is a 1 bite or a 2 bite contest. You know, if you did a really good job, the judge is probably going to go back and get another bite. But could you imagine like that table at a contest that's got like, I don't know, the Royal had like 500 teams ish, you know, like everybody's turning in 6 bones, you know, on ribs and they got to eat their share. Depending on how many judges showed, you know, and so everybody got their moment. So that's pretty crazy. So yeah, it's not a rib that you're going to want to like cook all the time and eat a slab by yourself. Definitely. So that's why I think I'm pulling back from all of those layers of flavors. One more thing though, I wanted to point out about layering flavors that I thought was interesting. And I didn't really think about this until a couple of years ago. There's a good friend named Michael Trump. Some of the old OG guys in here remember Oak Ridge Barbecue. And Mike handmade his rubs in the basement, and he was in distribution all over the country, even internationally. And he had a specific food FDA approved area in his basement that he went in there and made all this stuff. And I was at his house one day or whatever. We went downstairs and started messing around talking about barbecue rub and things like that. And he gave me a few samples and we got to talking about layering flavors. And he told me that if you put 2 things on at the same time, you have to add those 2 together. They're 1 layer. Layers don't count unless it's later in the process is what he told me. And I started thinking about that. And he said, yeah, so if you have like rub A and rub B, and rub A has a lot of salt, and then rub B also has salt in it, well, now you got to add this salt to that salt. And so you've got that much salt that you're putting in on whatever it is. And then you've got another layer of all the other seasonings in there. So if you really want to separate those as far as the profile of your food, you need to put those on at different times. And that's what I think the competition world has really figured out with all of these complex, scenarios. They add, like Eric Williams, shout out to him. He was number 2 last year in the entire Rib Cook-Off Association last year, cooking on drums, Super 55, by the way. And nobody knows how to do it better than him, probably out of my circle. But anyway, the thing is that now they're putting like maple syrup in there, and they've got all these other like sauces and seasonings and things they're doing at different stages. And that's how you can actually get those delays in that flavor profile that you're working with. Whenever you're biting into something, then you're like, oh, and then you get another oh at the very end. That's how you do that. You can't put them all on at the same time and then cook, or it's one.
You just brought up a huge topic for those that are cooking at home, buying pre-made rubs that they find at their local barbecue store or online. And they go, well, I'll just use a little of this one and a little of this one.
Mm-hmm.
They don't think, and until now, I don't think many people considered that when you're doing that in the beginning, that you're doubling up and sometimes tripling up on things like salt and pepper and other items, where you want to just get a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. You're like putting a ton of stuff on. And then later on, when someone bites into this and they question, why am I eating a rib as salty as the sea? That's where that came from.
Yeah, because that base layer, like so from 0 to 140, that's when the meat is in theory taking on the most smoke, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's also when moisture and salt and all of that stuff is doing its osmosis thing in there and happening like that. And so up until the point where you're starting to build a crust, once that crust starts to build, we're kind of limiting ourselves on how much is going to draw back into the meat at that point. The warmer that gets and the render starts, and everything's moving, like all the moisture might be moving to the middle and getting pressurized and concentrated, but the fats are coming out and rendering out off the surface. Some of that stuff is caramelizing and sealing off. And so we're probably not going to get that exchange at that point. That would be the time to start adding a second layer, because now we're going to be able to isolate it from what's inside the meat, from injection or the osmosis process and stuff like that. Yeah, it blew my mind when he said that, and I was like, oh, no wonder my barbecue sucks when I'm doing this competition stuff, because I'm trying to do it all in one step, to make it easier.
That's right. And everything in a competition is like a rush. We got to go. We have a turn-in time. You got to move.
Mm-hmm.
You're correct. But what you've just did is now you've transitioned us into signs of perfection. How to know when you're done.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So whether it's a beef rib or a pork rib, to know when they're done sometimes can be a little bit tricky. You'll hear people say, and it's true, that you want to look for bone pullback anywhere between 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch. You want a firm but yielding bend when you pick it up from the center. And with beef especially, you want to do that probe test. It's like sliding into room temp butter. So when you take your probe, your temperature probe, and you place it in, it should go right into that rib like it's butter. You shouldn't have that springiness to it. That's the way that I was taught that it was done. Same thing with the brisket, that you should be able to use your finger and push into it and put a dent in. What it really comes down to is don't trust the clock, trust your senses. You shouldn't be looking at it saying it's 3, 2, 1. So exactly 3 hours I do this, exactly 2 hours I do this, exactly 1. And I bring up 3, 2, 1 because we're talking about competition. Then you're about 2, 2, 1. 2 hours unwrapped, 2 hours wrapped, 1 hour unwrapped with whatever the sauce or glaze you're putting on. Though that just, you hear about these things, and that's how people try to tell you that it's done, by following this mathematical time calculation.
Yeah, totally agree. Your senses have to come into it. And, Richard Fergola, Fergalicious is how you know him on the barbecue internet. He has a thing. He says, if you can beat tenderness every time, if you can get your tenderness right, you'll probably get your name called most of the time. So the flavor layers is one thing, but the only way you can really tell tenderness is what you're saying, with observation and touch, because you can't bite the rib before the judge gets it, so that's not going to work. So the probe tenderness check and we used to use toothpicks because they made a smaller hole, but I never really could tell that good. My senses weren't adapted well to it. But nowadays, like, you can take the probe on your Thermopin, like you said, and stick it in like the warm butter. Another way that I used to be able to tell on pork ribs is, before I glaze, I'll turn that slab upside down. And usually I would go in like 2 ribs from the end. And then I would take that bone, because you'll have that reveal like you're talking about. And then I take that bone and I'll just give it just a little bit of a twist, and on a pork rib, and I'll try to see what's it doing on the membrane. Like, if you can kind of, where I pulled the membrane off, if you can see that little layer of skin, like it kind of wants to give on the second bone in, you're getting darn close. Because I'm not going to serve the first and second bone in my box. I'm not going to turn that in. I'm going to go to the middle of the box. And if everything aligns, if all the planets align, I'm going to pull off like a 4-on-4, which is 4 bones on the bottom and 4 bones on the top. It's highly likely that those are going to be 2 different slabs of ribs. So those bones match, and that's just my perspective on all of that. Tenderness trumps everything. And then if you can get your act together on some basic flavor layering, that would be a second concern, because taste is heavier weighted than appearance. So, if that makes sense.
It does. And,
I don't know if I went too deep.
No, the toothpick part you brought up, for the people who aren't in the competition side, they're in their backyard. It when I heard that, the first thing that came to mind was Harry Sue. That's exactly what he does. In fact, when he teaches classes, he doesn't talk about using a thermopen or a thermometer at all. Everything comes down to the toothpick and being able to judge your tenderness with the toothpick. And it should be, I think he says it's almost like putting it into peanut butter. It should be like that. He doesn't use warm butter like a knife butter. And he's talking cheap peanut butter, like Skippy or something.
Yeah, the cheap stuff
with nuts in it.
Yeah. The other thing to pay attention to also, if you're looking to do some kind of backyard competitions or whatever on your ribs, especially if you're doing spares, because the meat, I think, on spares is a little more string grainy on top, whereas baby backs are like more flat patches of meat, if you kind of look at the way they are when they're done. So and they also kind of baby backs tend to like string, like they try to crack long ways with the slab perpendicular to the bones, I've noticed. So on spares, when you're looking at them, if you do the hang test, I've got a few pictures of me with like ribs that I was proud of, and they look like bat wings. They're falling down and staying together, A. But B, I'm also looking to make sure that, like, I don't want it to get so tender to the point that those striations in the meat crack and start to pull apart. If we're to that point, then I've overshot tenderness, because you got to think, it's going to be a little while before that rib makes it to where it's got to go, and hot food wins. So if I got to keep that food hot, I got to not overcook, and I got to also be aware that, like, it's what it's going to do on its way to the table or whatever. So that's just another tenderness thing that I really pay attention to when I'm cooking ribs,
So with regards to tenderness, then we get into our rest time. Is it a deal breaker to let your ribs stay wrapped for 30 minutes or longer in a warmer? Do you find that it allows the internal juices to settle and the texture to improve dramatically versus, your ribs come out, they're glazed, they're ready to go. Whoever it is who's in charge of the knife or the electric knife does their trim to be able to put it into that beautifully manicured box for presentation. Do you have in your mind like an adequate amount of rest time, or too little or too much?
Yeah, so there is a balance there. So the one thing that you want to make sure to do when you're focused on tenderness in a rib, right, is you got to get rid of all that super hot radiant energy that's in the meat, no matter what meat it is, brisket, whatever. You got to let that thing come down. And there's two different realms I try to hit. So like if I was like foil wrapped on a brisket or a slab of ribs or whatever, I'll take that and set it on the table, and I'll open that foil, and depending on how much liquid is in there, I'll open it as much as I can so that the liquid is not insulating the meat. And I want to get all that steam out, like basically is what we're trying to do, because your brisket's at 212 degrees. It's going to continue, or that's where I would pull it if I was in competition. It's going to continue to cook as long as it's at that temperature, and it's going to overshoot on tenderness in the box, in the cooler, the Cambro, whatever you're putting it in. So you want to steam off as much as you can and try to get that temperature down, like I would say below 185 personally, if you can risk it. Because if you're at a contest, the weather almost always sucks, and it's probably going to be cold, or it's raining or some crap like that, or you're going to get busy. And if you let it go down too low, you're going to be putting gelatin fat in the box, with whatever it is. So, and then the judge is going to get a cold rib, which can affect your score. So you can't let it get down too much, but at the same time, you got to get rid of all that heat energy so that the juices can start to equal out in the meat, or instead of like being so pressured in there or pushing out. Now, for a 12-hour brisket rest, like I'm doing, I just got to keep above 140. If I'm at 150 for 12 hours, I'm happy. It's not going to render more fat if it's below 160, because that's kind of like what we're trying to do, is keep it but above 140, below 160. 150 feels really good. I'll rest that thing for 12 hours. It'll be magic the next day. Like the judge would thumb his nose at it probably because it's going to be so perfect.
Yeah.
In my experience. So, but anyway, I never
So
did that great in brisket on competitions. Speaking of that,
my thing was always chicken. When I was doing this with called Barbecue Joe's Smoking Pit. My thing was always getting the chicken done and then working on the pork butts. Somebody else dealt with brisket and somebody else was dealing with ribs. So we all kind of had a routine. We had something that we excelled at, and that was our item. That's what you were responsible for. That when the judges' scores came in, win, lose, or draw, that was your score. You were responsible for that.
yeah, yeah. So I wound up. We kind of divided it up with like one guy ran the pit. Another guy just kind of like ran boxes, was primarily, he was the cleanup man. So he would clean the box, wipe it out, take the picture, like just he had that stage of it. Another guy was just, we had four of us. So another guy was just like there to handle anything that didn't go according to plan. And then I was usually in the trailer, cutting and doing the meat, in the box or whatever, building boxes. And, man, it's kind of stressful, when you're you almost are doomed that you have to have great appearance, even though it's the lowest scored thing, like the lowest weight of your score. And then tenderness, which is the most important thing, you really didn't have any control. Like you just had to really just nail it, or otherwise, like it was a crapshoot, And I really enjoyed doing all that pressure and all that momentum and working in that environment. I really enjoyed that, because you could kind of get in your lane and put on some music and do that. But my goodness, was it expensive?
Yeah.
So $800 a weekend, man. Back
right.
in 2011 through 2017 is all I really was serious about it, and so shout out to those guys that do it. But then there's things like this Rib Cook-Off Association that Eric's in. That's a great place to get started because you don't have a four categories you got to deal with plus ancillaries if you decide to do that. And it's a great place to get started. So
would you, if they had a rib competition, just going through this, now that we discussed beef ribs and we discussed pork ribs, I guess I'm kind of putting you on the spot on this one.
Yeah.
If the competition was for those plate ribs, would you cut that in a competition, a Hollywood cut? Would you take the two bones off the side and have like this massive one beef rib that you turn in?
Yes. If it would fit in the box. So we didn't talk about Hollywood cut, did we? I forgot.
No.
So this was the Archie Boys thing. Those guys that have been around long enough remember the latest team name they had was Pit Hustle, but in the early days on Barbecue Pitmasters, their name was Lulu's Barbecue. Anyway, they can tell their story one day, but those guys were the ones. I was cooking with Colby Archie in Tunica, Mississippi one time, and that we did really well at that contest. That was one of the best ones I ever was in. But anyway, that was where he introduced me to Hollywood cut, which is where you cut, like you got three bones and you're going to cut all the way up against the right hand bone and then all the way up against the left hand bone, putting as much meat as possible on the middle bone. And if you try to do that in a KCBS contest or something, I'm not really sure you could fit all six in the box because like we did, but you got to kind of go towards you can't go on that real big bone side. You got to go down towards the middle of the rack to be able to fit those in. You'll get 3-on-3 that way. But the beautiful thing about that is that like when the judge bites into the rib, they're looking to see that the meat, like they want to see their teeth marks on the meat, and they want to see the bone pull clean, and they're going to bite down in the very middle side of the bone, and they want to see the bone pull clean, but the meat stay on the bone. So they see teeth marks. And then if they nail it and they're a snobby judge or they're just like me, they're going to flip it back around. They're going to take a bite on the other side. And if you can pull that off, if you're at least the way I always thought, if you can pull off the meat staying on both sides of your bite and you can see teeth marks on both sides, you probably just got a perfect score, in my opinion, on tenderness. Because you know how it is, if you bite down in the middle, a lot of times the pullback side of the bone is going to come off and chin flap, and that would indicate overcooked, is what that would indicate. So,
wow.
Yeah. Eric's got some more wisdom he's dropping here, because this is what he's the pro here. I think you have to consider texture as part of your tenderness. Tender ribs without good texture will miss. That's right. So texture, we're talking about like just the overall mouthfeel in the bite and stuff like that. Like if you get dry surface texture, you don't have any moisture there. I think, is that what you're saying, Eric? For what you're talking about. But yeah, that's kind of what I would imagine. Jordan says, you don't cut them like that at home? I do cut them like that at home for my rib. So unless we're all hangry.
So for the person who's cooking at home, whether they're the amateur to intermediate, they're not in the competition level. We've got a couple of things coming up in May.
Oh yeah,
right. Mm-hmm. We've got Mother's Day, so there might be quite a few husbands, boyfriends, sons that are out there that are putting together their at-home cook. And then towards the end of the month, we've got the unofficial kickoff to summer with Memorial Day. Do you have any words of wisdom for those that are backyard cooks?
Yeah. Word number one, I'm looking for, okay, El Presidente, word number one is you need to show up in Canton, Texas on the 17th of May, if you possibly can pull it off. That's when El Presidente is putting together the next meetup in Canton, Texas. He's got tri-tip, picanha, chicken. He's got St. Louis trim ribs, brisket, and a few pits for you to cook on. So bring your favorite seasonings and pay attention, because this is your chance to run pits that you may or may not have at home. Anyway, so that's the first thing. This and rewind it. What am I giving advice for the guys that are coming up for backyard?
The guys that are your beginners to intermediates. Yeah. They're the at-home cook, whether they're a barbecue fanatic or they're first getting into playing with charcoal and playing with fire.
So don't be intimidated. Is my first biggest thing besides go to the Canton meetup. Don't be intimidated by the price of the meat. Like the price of a prime brisket versus a choice brisket, it is a price difference. But if it's your first brisket, like this is your first brisket, man, like lean in on that. Make it a story, right? That you can tell. And just get in the Smoke Slinger Pit Owners group, because we'll hold your hand all the way through the whole deal if you need your hand held. That's what we do here. We nerd out in there twice as bad as we do on the thing here. So there's that. But it's such a forgiving thing if you just take your time and don't panic and learn your pit. So before you put that brisket on, maybe just practice running a few fires and trying to maintain a certain temperature if you're brand new to this. If you've got some experience behind your belt, and you want to lean into something a little more, there again, jump in the group and kick the ball around before your cook and figure out what you want to do. There's so many different ways to run this equipment that I mean, ours especially, but the other equipment that's out there too. So many different ways, only limited by your own creativity, I think. And then, exactly what Jordan Schilling said, always give extra time, because if you mess it up, it's not going to be messed up because you broke it. It's going to be messed up because you didn't get it done on time and your people are waiting. That is sage wisdom advice right there, in my opinion. Would you agree?
Yes. Murphy's Law. I say this all the time. Damn that Murphy.
Yeah.
And it happens, and you start to get nervous, and you say to yourself, maybe I need to raise the temperature to cook quicker. It's the biggest
Mhm.
mistake you can make.
Yeah. So, with brisket and stuff like that, like I'm doing a 24-hour long cook if I'm cooking on an offset. I'm going to start if we're going to serve at 4 o'clock to tomorrow, 4 o'clock today. My brisket's going on, which means that my pit is lit probably 2 hours before the brisket goes on, and my brisket was probably trimmed at least the night before. So, like, it's a process that you got to give yourself lots and lots of time. And then remember, all the magic happens in the rest. So it's totally okay to be done early on anything.
Mhm.
Um, even ABTs, I think. I mean, have you ever had it like appetizer things like bacon wrapped jalapenos? You want them to stay hot,
Yep.
but that pepper just gets tender and well, you like a little bit of snap to your peppers, I think you
I like a
said.
little bit of a bite. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I want to be able to like spread them. I want to eat that thing and one bite and chew on it, and it's just going to be done and it's all nice. I don't like to feel the pepper really, but a good rest is a huge deal. Yeah. And then also, you can experiment around with the sous vide process. We've not really talked about that too much, Dave. But if you can cook days in advance, and then food saver all that stuff, or whatever you do with the vac seal bags for sous vide, put that stuff in the fridge. And then if you've got sous vide, or I usually use a turkey fryer burner and a pot of water,
Mhm.
and then just keep the water down below boiling, like keep it in the 190, something like that, and at sea level. And you can dunk that bag for 30 minutes, and those ribs will come out of there just like they came off the pit. I mean, it'll be perfect. So if you needed to practice ahead of time for your big get together on Memorial Day weekend, totally feel free to do that. Barbecue is always better the next day anyway, isn't it?
It is. It is. And where
Yeah.
you were kind of going down what happens on the restaurant side. We didn't get into that. And you par cook them, and then you put them into the vacuum seal bag,
Hmm.
and then you can finish them off it's doing sous vide, or you can start them sous vide,
Hmm.
and then finish them off right there live fire, on a grill or uh, on your offset. Um, that's a trick of the trade. The other thing is, we didn't get into this one. I know a lot of places play with it. Is liquid smoke. They
Oh
cheat.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a
Can't
lot
do
of
that.
scheming and cheating in the restaurant industry,
Yeah.
where yeah, they put them into the steamer and they steam them with liquid smoke, and they have an offset someplace else that's just there for show. That's looks like a chimney, and you think it's coming off of there, and it never did. It went onto
Yeah.
the char broiler. That's how they finished it off after they steamed them.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, completely off topic of today's thing. This is a bonus question. Have you ever heard of a carving ham? The
Yes.
cut
Oh yeah.
carving ham.
Yep.
I'd never seen them before, and they had them here at the local grocery store, from Smithfield for Easter. Dude, we've been buying those hams, and then we got. I wanted to buy a whole bunch more and put them in the freezer because that ham is so cool because it's like they just like filleted off the best side of the ham, and
Hmm.
it's like just shaped like flat on the bottom, and then it's like ovaled on the top. It almost reminds me kind of like a brisket point, almost the way it's shaped.
Right.
And dude, those are great, man. I didn't know if you ever heard of that or not in your butchery stuff.
Oh yeah. They're
Carving
Costco
ham.
for Easter. Costco had them like they were everywhere. Same thing with like Sam's Club. All these places had them, and then they give you the glaze and everything to go with it. All you do is stick it in the oven, put on your glaze, do whatever you're gonna do, and like the magic's already happened.
Yeah, no bone,
No
solid
bone.
muscle ham, glorious. Those are cool. Anyway, that's on my list now.
Oh yeah. Or you get the whole steamship of the whole ham steamship, and you debone it and then stuff it with something. And then when you slice it up later on, that's the white ham instead of the pink ham. Everyone, when people think of ham, they think it's pink. That's because it's been smoked. But the ham
Hmm.
itself is white. That's why they call pork the other white meat.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got one more question here from Chris Ferrara. What type seasoning, if any, would you put on beef ribs and pork ribs? That's a great question. You want me to go? You go?
SPG.
SPG, Dave, all the way, huh? Yeah. So I'm an SPG guy now these days, but I have been playing around with SPG on beef and then adding something to it. For instance, you always hear about the Lowry's getting topped on there.
Yeah.
Brad or somebody talks about, no, it was Ant that talked about a rub. I think it was in one of his Goldies videos, maybe, or something. Sorry, Ant's Barbecue Cookout was the channel on YouTube, but he talks about a thing called barbecue or called what is the stuff? Lowry's crack is what they call it, and it's some kind of doctored up Lowry's. I never did get the recipe for what it is, but that stuff's all over the internet now, and you just want to put some kind of another layer on top. I've played around with Mark Lambert's Texas beef rub from Sweet Swine of Mine. That's pretty good stuff. And then on pork, I always go with something salty, buttery, garlicky, kind of like my buddy Scott Bartlow has at Bartlow's Barbecue has his Dust Bowl rub I like for that base first rub I put on. Another one that is very, very popular is anything White Lightning. There's like multiple different ones from Boar's Night Out.
Double garlic butter. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, double garlic butter is that's why I like Scott's. It's kind of along that same deal with the Dust Bowl, but yeah, double butter garlic is like a staple in a lot of different cook-off associations. And then do something all-purpose on top of that for like an all-purpose pork, and then start layering out from there during your cook process. Because you just can't get that double garlic butter. I mean, you can't go wrong with that.
No.
It's not overly salty, and so it's not going to clash with something like 43rd Parallel. I really like their Sweet Heat rub. Jason was watching here tonight. You can get that. I'm not really sure where, but you can get it at barbecue stores. I know you can get it up in Wisconsin at the one up there. But yeah, 43rd Parallel is a great Sweet Heat rub to put on at that second layer on with the base layer. Mm-hmm.
Frank, you've been with me. There hasn't been a store we've walked into, whether it's a barbecue store, an Academy Sports, a Walmart, that I get lost in a spice aisle. There hasn't been a time that I haven't walked out with a bag of spices and I've said, I don't have this one in my collection. So if you think for a moment that I just have this elaborate collection, closets full of rubs, and I'm just thinking with SPG, put your blinders on. Yeah, because I do a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of different rubs. There's a lot of different flavors. There's things that I truly enjoy and I try to reverse engineer. You bring up the seasoning. I believe it's called seasonal that I just found to be incredibly flavorful on chicken and on other items. And I think what it comes down to, and I've been looking at a lot of these things, there's MSG in there. And that truly is crack. Because once you put that into something, and you hear from Chinese restaurants, no MSG, I don't want that in there. It's going to put me to sleep. Monosodium glutamate. But it really does enhance the flavor of food. It's true.
It just opens everything up.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it wakes everything up, gets it where it can be. Your receptors are like, oh, yeah, let's go.
Right.
And that's what it does, yeah.
So I do play around with a lot of different rubs. The first thing I do when I get a rub, even if it's in the store and I know it's sealed, is I open up the cap to get the nose on it. I want to know what it smells like. And that will help me to understand later on what it might taste like. And I get my kids into this. I call one taste tester number one, the other one taste tester number two. We take the if it's a screw off top, it's one thing, but a lot of times the shakers have that plastic that's in there. We pop that off and we put our finger in and taste every one to be able to understand the flavor profile before it ever touches the food. And you hope that what is in the bottle, what you smell, what you taste is what's going to be on the food. But it doesn't always work out that way, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, as far as what who asked the question? Chris asked, what type of seasoning, if any, would I put on beef and ribs, beef ribs and pork ribs? It really comes down to if I'm making it for myself or I'm making it for other people and understanding what works with what. there's a lot of complex flavors out there. When we start to get into like Kona rubs, coffee rubs, those can get very complex. Whereas simplicity is just salt, pepper, and garlic. It's things that we all know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the audience that I'm cooking for that helps to determine what I'm making, as well as what are the sides. And if I'm pairing this with different drinks, let's just say I'm pairing it with wines or beers, how that works together. So it's about the entire palate. It's the whole experience of when you're eating.
Yeah. Yeah, and then also what you're going to do with it for leftovers needs to come into consideration a little bit too, because if it's just going to go into tacos,
right?
You might be thinking about like the taco side of things too. I tend to put everything goes on a burrito, man, at my house. Pretty much the leftovers do, or it goes in the mac and cheese. So
that's
chop
right.
it up, stick it in there, boy. You'll be happy.
A lot of
you
this stuff gets
did.
repurposed. And brisket and eggs. If you made a really salty brisket, it's a
Mhm.
problem when you're making certain types of eggs because it's going to overpower the eggs.
Yeah,
And
it
you
can.
bring up like tacos and burritos. If you're making an omelet, the cheeses that you have in that already have certain salts. So now you've got a salty brisket with a salty cheese, and it affects the complexity of that omelet.
Yeah.
We're getting deep.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
then the bacon that has salt in it, so again, back to what you were saying earlier, if you're taking two different rubs, you can combine them together at the same time, you just double the amount of salt.
So bacon ribs. We're talking about the spare rib that's got the pork belly on it still, bacon ribs. I'm assuming, because I've never actually had one, but I'm assuming that it's not cured, so it's not really bacon, it's called fresh side, right?
Right.
However, what if it was cured?
I'm down for it. That it's here. That I have it, or that I can have it within the day. So if it's something that is, if curiosity is there, then it's something that has to be done in order to talk
For
about
science.
We have to. It's for science. It's got to happen. Because the other way that you're talking about, just a standard bacon rib, it's the whole thing is outstanding. There's a lot of fat. You can only render so much down because you're still eating pork belly with a bone in it. What's the Chinese way? Chartreuse. There's a slipped my name. When it's done that way and it's under like your broiler, and you're able to crisp up the outside, it's a lot more enjoyable than on when you're doing it low and slow. I just think it needs high heat. You got to crisp it up. You need to cook everything kind of through. Whereas if you're cooking this pork belly with a bone in like a brisket, it becomes mush.
Yeah, I would be curious because like if you did a cured one, we're gonna have all that salt content in it, right?
Right.
And so now we're gonna have to go sweet with all of our layers. That's where my brain's going. So it's almost going to be like almost like burn ends, kind of like what you do pork belly burn ends, almost that kind of an approach. So at some point, I suppose, if you're really going to go sweet with it and start glazing it and all that, I guess you're going to want to go ahead and cut it up like party ribs at some point and finish them like that.
Maybe.
Question mark. So you can kind of get the bark on the sides of that rib. As much fat as there is, there should be no problem with that.
Maybe salt. See, with salt, you need an acid. So you have to put a vinegar in there.
Yeah.
Right, so, like to me, I'm thinking right now that if you've got that much salt in it, you're going to need apple cider vinegar on the
Pickled
outside.
belly peppers.
Something you got to do. Something's got to be done to it. The sugary sweetness towards the end, I agree. When I see people make their burnt ends and they're just tossing it through with all that barbecue sauce, I feel like you've defeated the purpose. Like I might as well just have a sponge of barbecue sauce.
Yeah. I think you can get carried away with the sauce side of that, where it's just like too much. It needs to be more like layering, like we're talking about, thin layers, multiple times, different stages, I think, to really pull it off and pull it off well. Well, buddy, that was a good show, man. Good job, Dave.
Well, I'll tell you, after this conversation, to me, the bottom line, plate ribs are the crown jewel of beef. They truly
I
are.
agree.
Chuck
However,
ribs are your smart money cook.
Yeah, and however, we need to figure out a way to identify them things in the case to know if we're getting ripped off by the local meat cutter, because he's not a butcher, he's a meat cutter.
You're probably your local Sam's Club, before they take them and cut them into to short ribs, or they trim them down into that Korean style rib. They come double packed. Sometimes it's 4 to a pack in a cryo pack.
Mm-hmm.
They can't lie to you then, because you're buying them in a cryo pack, and that would probably be the best way to go about this.
Okay.
Just let them know this is what I want, and they're going to pull them out of a case in the back, the whole thing cryo packed. Take them home like that. Cook one, maybe 2 racks, and then take the other 2, vacuum seal them, and throw them in your deep freezer for another day.
Yeah. Good idea, man. All right, guys. Well, hey, we appreciate you guys tuning in this time. We'll be back next Monday night at 7 p.m. Central Time. Watch for us to announce it, because sometimes, like this time, we had to kick it back a day. We got busy. But anyway, Justin Kaufman, I see you right there. Hang on. We got to get this one. Brother Justin wants to know, between Liberty 94 and the full-size smoke slinger, which would hold more meat? Definitely the full-size smoke slinger all day long. Check out the YouTube channel, Smoke Slinger. I did an 8 pork butt cook. You might be crazy if you do this, but you could do 16 pork butts in that. And you can follow a guy named Derek Lewis in the Smoke Slinger Pit Owners group. That dude could fit more food on a smoke slinger than any man alive. He's also a joy to watch because he can cook. So Smoke Slinger Pit Owners group, guys, get in there. You'll enjoy it. Appreciate you guys. Till next time, keep your smoke thin and blue. This is Frank Cox signing off for my buddy at Real Meat Stick there. We'll see you next time.